The city lights flickered through the window as I turned the key in the lock, pushing open the door to my apartment. The familiar creak of the hinges greeted me, but the silence that followed was unusual. I had come home early, clutching concert tickets in my hand, a surprise for Lucas. Our relationship had felt distant lately, like a fraying rope threatening to snap. I hoped tonight would be different, a chance to rekindle the spark that had dimmed over the past few months. As I stepped into the bedroom, the world seemed to slow down. There they were, Lucas and Charlotte tangled in the sheets, their bodies intertwined in a way that left no room for misinterpretation. The sight hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air out of my lungs. I stood there, frozen as a sharp, metallic taste flooded my mouth. My heart pounded in my ears, drowning out every rational thought. Charlotte propped herself up on one elbow, her dark hair cascading over Lucas's bare chest like a silk ribbon tying them together. She didn't bother covering herself, meeting my gaze with a cool, assessing look. There was no shame, no guilt in her eyes, just a calm detachment, as if she had been expecting this moment. Lucas ran a hand through his hair, letting out a sigh that sounded more like annoyance than regret. "Ava," he started, his voice low and controlled. The sound of my name on his lips cut through the air like a blade. I couldn't bear to hear whatever excuse or justification he was about to offer. What could he possibly say that would make this right, that it wasn't what it looked like, that I had misunderstood? The concert tickets slipped from my fingers, scattering like discarded confetti on the hardwood floor. I had imagined a different night, one filled with laughter, music, and a reminder of why we had chosen each other. Instead, I was standing here, facing the cold, ugly truth that had apparently existed long before I had stumbled upon it. "How long?" I managed to choke out, my voice barely above a whisper. The question hung in the air, heavy with the weight of betrayal. Lucas finally met my gaze, his eyes flickering with something unreadable. 2 months officially, he admitted, but we've been talking for longer. His words sent a wave of nausea crashing over me. I remembered the whispers, the subtle hints, the way my mother had praised Charlotte's ambition and strength. Victoria had always made it clear that she thought Charlotte was the better match for Lucas. I had laughed it off, refusing to believe that my own mother would deliberately sabotage my relationship. But now, as I stood here, the pieces fell into place with a sickening clarity. "Since Mom had her little chat with you," I finished for him, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. The realization dawned on their faces. They hadn't expected me to know about that conversation. But I had overheard it all, the seeds of betrayal planted in the hushed tones of a family gathering. My limbs felt heavy, but I refused to let them see me break. No screaming, no crying. Not here. I turned and walked out, leaving behind the shattered remnants of what I had once called love. Lucas didn't chase after me. Neither did Charlotte. They didn't need to. The damage was done. I barely remember driving to my mother's house, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly I thought my knuckles might snap. The familiar streets blurred past as I navigated the short distance to the place that had once been my home. I should have gone to Jamie's, my best friend, the only person who wouldn't look at me with pity or judgment. But I needed answers. I needed to confront the source of this betrayal. As I stormed into the kitchen, my heart still hammering in my chest, I found Victoria standing by the island, arranging flowers in a crystal vase. She looked up, her expression impassive, as if she had been expecting me. "You knew," I accused, my voice raw with disbelief. She sighed, setting down the flowers and turning to face me fully. "Ava, this is unnecessary," she said, her tone dismissive, as if I were a child throwing a tantrum. "Unnecessary," I echoed, my voice cracking. "You convinced my boyfriend to be with my sister, and you don't even have the decency to deny it." Victoria's expression remained unchanged, her eyes cold and calculating. "Charlotte is more suited for him," she said simply. "She has direction, ambition. You've always been the dreamer, Ava. Too soft for a man like Lucas." Something inside me snapped. All my life, I had been the lesser daughter, the lesser student, the lesser success story. No matter what I did, it was never enough. Charlotte got the praise, the admiration. And now she had taken this from me too. "I don't even know why I'm surprised," I whispered, gripping the edge of the counter to steady myself. "I should have known you'd pick her. You always do." Victoria returned to her flowers, her voice cool and detached. "Relationships end all the time, Ava. Don't be dramatic." A cold realization slithered through me. She hadn't just condoned this betrayal. She had orchestrated it. I stared at her, at the mother who had never truly been mine. And then, just like before, I turned and walked away. But this time, I was leaving more than just a conversation. I was leaving behind a life that had been built on lies and manipulation. That night, I packed in silence, the weight of my decision settling over me like a shroud. Clothes, art supplies, a single box of keepsakes, the remnants of a life that no longer felt like my own. The apartment had been a secondhand collection of memories, things Lucas and I had accumulated over the years. Now, it was just a shell, a place I no longer belonged. Jamie came over without question, taking one look at the mess of half-filled boxes and grabbing a roll of packing tape. "You're not staying here, are you?" she asked, her voice steady and supportive. I shook my head, the motion feeling final and irrevocable. "I can't," I admitted. "I need to go somewhere far. Somewhere where I can start over." Jamie didn't argue. She just hugged me tight like she knew I needed it, like she knew I would fall apart if she let go too soon. By morning, my car was packed, and I was ready to leave behind the life I had known. Victoria hadn't called, neither had Charlotte. Their silence spoke volumes, confirming that I was making the right choice. I left a single note behind, the words echoing with the determination I hadn't known I possessed. "Watch me thrive," it read, a promise to myself and a challenge to those who had underestimated me. As Philadelphia faded in my rearview mirror, I felt a mix of fear and exhilaration. I had nothing, no job, no apartment, no plan, but I had freedom and I would build something better than they ever imagined. My first night in Chicago was spent in a motel that smelled of stale cigarettes and cheap air freshener. The floral patterned bedspread was faded and the carpet was worn down to threads in some spots. But it was mine, at least for now. I dropped my duffel onto the bed and sat down, staring at the peeling wallpaper. The silence was oppressive, thick with thoughts I didn't want to entertain. I had done it. I had left. But now what? I reached for my phone, instinctively wanting to text Lucas. My fingers hovered over the screen before I let out a bitter laugh and tossed the phone aside. Not anymore. Instead, I pulled out my laptop and started searching for apartments. Something cheap, something temporary. Most listings were out of my budget, and the few that weren't looked about as inviting as the motel I was sitting in. A lump formed in my throat, but I shoved it down one step at a time. I had been in Chicago for 5 days when the reality of my situation truly set in. My savings were already dwindling: gas, food, the motel fee. I needed a job and fast. I spent hours at a cramped cafe, my laptop open, applying for anything remotely relevant: receptionist, office assistant, sales associate. I even considered a barista job despite having the caffeine tolerance of a toddler. The rejections came fast, or worse, silence. "We regret to inform you that we've chosen another candidate. We are moving forward with applicants who better match our qualifications. Thank you for your interest. Unfortunately, at this time." On day 7, I showed up in person at a small advertising firm. I had sent in an application for a receptionist position and figured if they saw me, maybe I'd have a shot. The woman at the front desk barely looked up from her computer. "Did you apply online?" she asked, her voice flat. "Yes, but I wanted to. If we're interested, we'll reach out. Have a nice day." I stood there for a second, stunned, before swallowing my pride and walking out. That night, I sat in my motel room, my laptop glowing in the dim light, my bank balance glaring at me like an accusation. $846.32. I rubbed my hands over my face. At this rate, I had maybe 3 weeks before I'd be out of money for the first time since leaving Philadelphia. Fear settled in. What if this was a mistake? What if I had been reckless? What if I had left everything behind only to crash and burn? I grabbed my phone, my thumb hovering over Jamie's name. I knew she'd pick up. She'd tell me to come home, to crash on her couch, to figure things out with some kind of safety net. But I couldn't. I had walked away with my head high, promising myself that I would build something better, that I would prove to myself and to them that I could thrive, and that meant staying. On day 11, I found it a job listing buried between a bunch of dead-end postings. Executive assistant needed at Meridian Investment Group, must be detail-oriented, quick on your feet, and ready to handle a fast-paced environment. It sounded like code for prepare to be someone's overworked, underpaid personal punching bag. But at this point, I didn't care. I applied, expecting another rejection. Instead, I got an email the next morning. "We'd like to schedule an interview. Can you come in today at 2 p.m.? I stared at the screen, rereading it 3 times. I had to resist the urge to respond with, "Are you sure?" I had nothing to wear except the one blazer I had packed last minute. I ironed it using the motel's best ironing board, praying no one would notice the fact that it was a little too big on me. The office was downtown, a towering glass building that screamed money and power. I stepped inside, feeling completely out of place. A sharp-dressed woman at the front desk glanced up. Ava Hart, follow me. She led me through a maze of cubicles and sleek conference rooms before stopping in front of an office. Mr. Reynolds will see you now. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. Behind the desk sat Patrick Reynolds, dark hair, slightly tousled, crisp white shirt with sleeves rolled up. He looked up from his laptop, eyes sharp and assessing. You're here for the assistant position? He asked, his voice steady and commanding. Yes, I said, somehow keeping my voice steady. Why do you want to work here? I hesitated for a split second before answering honestly, because I'm good at handling chaos. One of his eyebrows lifted. Chaos? I straightened my shoulders, meeting his gaze head on. I can organize, adapt, problem solve. I learn fast, I work hard, and I know how to handle difficult people. He let out a small, almost amused sound. You think I'm difficult? I didn't know yet, I admitted, but I've met enough people like you to make an educated guess. There was a long pause, then, to my absolute shock, he laughed. Not a polite chuckle, but a real full laugh. I like you, he said. You start Monday. Just like that, I had a job. Working for Patrick Reynolds was trial by fire. He was a machine, his days booked down to the minute, his expectations sky high. I had to memorize names, schedules, client portfolios within a week. He didn't believe in repeating himself. If he told me something once, he expected me to remember it forever. The first time I forgot to forward an important email, he barely looked up from his screen as he said, Ava, do I seem like the kind of person who enjoys repeating myself? I wanted to crawl under the desk, but I didn't quit. Every mistake I fixed, every critique, every sorb, I learned how he liked his formatted, how to anticipate what he needed before he asked him. And slowly I started to get it. 3 weeks in, Patrick handed me a stack of reports and said, reorganize these, make them more efficient. I did. The next morning, I found a Post-it on my desk, one word scribbled in his sharp, precise handwriting, impressive. I stared at it for a long time. It wasn't much, but it meant everything. For the first time since leaving Philadelphia, I felt like I was building something, and I wasn't going to stop. As the weeks turned into months, I realized two things. First, I was damn good at my job. I had a knack for organization and a relentless drive to succeed. Patrick began to rely on me more and more, trusting me with sensitive information and important tasks. I became his right hand, the person he turned to when he needed something done efficiently and discreetly. The second realization, however, was more complicated. I started noticing the little things, the way Patrick's voice softened when he asked if I had eaten, or how he remembered my favorite tea, even though I had only mentioned it once. I found myself lingering in his office doorway, watching as he rolled up his sleeves, deep in thought over a spreadsheet. I was falling for Patrick Reynolds, and it was the dumbest thing I could possibly do. We had been working late, as usual, the office empty except for the two of us. The glow of our laptops cast a soft light on the stacks of reports surrounding us. I could hear the low hum of the city outside, the distant honking of taxis, the occasional murmur of people heading home. Patrick leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temple. I swear, if I have to look at one more financial projection tonight, I might throw my laptop out the window, he said, a tired laugh escaping his lips. I smirked, leaning against his desk. That would be a bold financial decision for an investment firm CEO, I teased. He let out a tired laugh. See, this is why I keep you around, to remind me not to make dumb decisions. I hesitated for a split second before saying, I think you already know which decisions are dumb. You just like testing your limits. His eyes flicked up to mine, something unreadable in his gaze. Is that what you think? I swallowed, feeling the air between us shift. This was dangerous territory, too personal, too close. I straightened up, trying to regain my composure. I should probably head out, I said, my voice steady despite the hammering of my pulse. Patrick didn't respond right away. Then, so quietly I almost didn't hear it, he said, I don't want you to go. The air between us grew thick with tension. I felt my heart pounding in my chest, my breath catching in my throat. This wasn't like the easy banter we usually had. This was something else entirely. I should have left. I should have laughed it off, made some joke, and walked out like nothing had happened. Instead, I heard myself say, then tell me why I should stay. For a long moment, Patrick just looked at me, his expression unreadable. Then, before I could take the words back, before I could stop myself from doing something reckless, he kissed me. It started like an earthquake, sudden, powerful, impossible to ignore. 1 second, I was standing there, Breathless and uncertain, and the next I was pressed against the edge of his desk, his hands framing my face like he was afraid I'd disappear if he let go. I should have stopped it. This was my boss, my career, the one thing I had rebuilt from the ground up after everything had been taken from me. But all I could think about was how right it felt, how terrifyingly right. When we finally pulled away, I felt my heart hammering against my ribs. This is a terrible idea, I whispered, my voice barely audible. Patrick exhaled sharply, his forehead resting against mine. Yeah, the worst. Neither of us moved, and that was how it began. For the first few weeks, nothing changed at work. We were careful, discreet. During business hours, we were still Patrick Reynolds and Ava Hart, the unstoppable duo. I still anticipated his every move, still ran his schedules like a well-oiled machine. But after hours, after the office had emptied and the city lights flickered to life, I was just Ava, and he was just Patrick. We would grab late night takeout and eat it in his office, our legs tangled together on his sleek leather couch. Sometimes we didn't talk at all. It was dangerous, and I knew it. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't just surviving. I was living. I should have known it wouldn't last. One night, Patrick was driving me home after another long workday that had bled into personal time. The city lights blurred past as I stared out the window, lost in thought. Patrick's voice cut through the silence, sudden and determined. I want to start my own firm, he said. I turned to him, blinking in surprise. What? He kept his eyes on the road, his jaw tight. I've been thinking about it for months. Meridian is fine, but I want something better, a firm that actually cares about the companies we invest in. Something built on more than just profit margins. I studied him, taking in the resolve in his expression. That's a big move, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Yeah, he finally glanced at me, but I don't want to do it alone. I want you with me, Ava. Not as my assistant, as my partner. The words settled between us, heavy and impossible to ignore. If I said yes, it would mean everything would change, not just my job, but my entire future. I don't know, I admitted, my voice barely audible. Patrick nodded like he had expected that answer. Just think about it, he said softly. And I did. For days, I wrestled with the decision. Leaving Meridian would mean leaving behind stability, security, everything I had worked so hard to build. But staying meant something even worse, losing him. And that wasn't an option. 2 weeks later, I walked into his office, shutting the door behind me. Patrick looked up, his face unreadable. I took a deep breath. I'm in, I said. For a second, he didn't react. Then, slowly, a grin spread across his face. You're sure? I let out a shaky laugh. No, but let's do it anyway. He crossed the room in 3 strides, pulling me into a fierce, breath-stealing kiss. And just like that, we jumped, ready to start a company from the ground up. It was nothing like working for Meridian. There was no safety net, no endless resources, just us, a handful of spreadsheets and a dream. Our apartment doubled as an office. We worked at all hours, chasing down investors, building our client list from scratch. There were fights, God, there were fights. Patrick pushed hard and I pushed back. But we fought for each other, not against each other. 6 months in, we signed our first major client. A year later, we were turning a profit. And 2 years after that, Reynolds Capital Partners was a name people actually knew. But none of it compared to the night Patrick slid a simple gold band onto my finger and said, be my partner in everything. This time I didn't hesitate. Always, I whispered, my voice filled with conviction. I had spent years outrunning my past, burying it under late nights at the office, under Patrick's steady hands and whispered reassurances, under the company we built, the success we fought for, the life I had carved out of nothing. But the past has a way of finding you, especially when it signs an acquisition deal with your company. The Natural History Museum glowed under soft lighting, its vaulted ceilings giving an air of grandeur that matched the occasion. Our company's biggest names mingled over champagne, voices buzzing with excitement. Patrick and I stood near the entrance, greeting guests as they arrived. The gala was a celebration of our success, a testament to the hard work and dedication that had brought us to this moment. As the evening unfolded, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and accomplishment. The business deal was a triumph. Our investors were impressed, and Patrick, my husband, my partner, my everything, never strayed too far from my side. But amidst the celebration, a familiar tension lingered in the air. They were here, my mother, Victoria, along with Charlotte and Lucas. I had known this moment was coming, had prepared for it, yet the sight of them still sent a shiver down my spine. They hesitated just inside the doorway, scanning the room, looking for familiar faces, for a place to belong. But this wasn't their world, it was mine. I let them come to me, watching as Victoria spotted me first, her carefully curated social smile flickering slightly before she smoothed it back into place. Ava, she said, kissing the air beside my cheek like we were old friends instead of a mother and daughter who hadn't spoken in years. You look successful. I offered her a polite smile, my voice steady. Thank you, mother. It's been a journey. Victoria finally looked at Patrick, extending a well-manicured hand. It's so nice to finally meet you, Patrick. I assume you already know a lot about me. Patrick took her hand, his grip firm, his expression unreadable. Likewise, Mrs. Hart, though I must admit, your reputation precedes you. The meeting wasn't lost on her. Victoria's lips pressed together, but she didn't deny it. Charlotte finally stepped forward, her eyes flicking between Patrick and me. Your company has grown a lot, she said, a hint of envy in her voice. You must be proud. I smiled, my gaze steady. I am. We've worked hard to get here. Charlotte's eyes lingered on Patrick, standing tall beside me, his hand resting protectively on the small of my back. She had always been the one people looked at first, but tonight she was in my shadow. Lucas finally spoke, his voice quieter than I remembered. Congratulations, Ava. Really? I studied him for a moment, searching for something regret, nostalgia, but there was nothing there. Just a man who had settled for the life he chose. Thank you, Lucas, I said, meaning it. Because if they hadn't done what they did, I wouldn't be standing here. I wouldn't have found this life, this love. I wouldn't have found myself. Victoria was watching me closely, still trying to figure out where she fit in. You've come a long way, she said finally. And for once, I couldn't detect any condescension in her tone. I agreed, my voice steady, and I did it without any of you. Her smile faltered just a fraction, and I saw the realization dawn in her eyes. She had underestimated me, had thought I would always be the lesser daughter, the one who needed her guidance and approval. But I had proven her wrong. I had built something real, something lasting, and I had done it on my own terms. As the evening wore on, I let myself enjoy the moment. The business deal was a success, our investors were impressed, and Patrick never strayed too far from my side. At some point, I noticed Charlotte and Lucas standing near the bar, their conversation tense. Charlotte gestured sharply, frustration written across every inch of her expression. Lucas looked exhausted, resigned. I turned back to my own conversation, uninterested in whatever was unraveling between them. It wasn't my problem anymore. Patrick leaned in, his voice a soft murmur in my ear. They don't matter, Ava. You've proven that. I glanced at him, a small smile playing on my lips. I know I said, my voice filled with conviction. And I did. I had spent years wondering if I would ever be free of them, of their betrayal, of the ache that had lived beneath my skin since that night in Philadelphia. But the truth was painfully simple. They weren't monsters. They weren't some great, powerful force I needed to overcome. They were just people who had made choices that cost them more than they realized. And now I was done waiting. As the gala came to a close, I stepped outside with Patrick, breathing in the cool night air. A voice stopped me in my tracks. Ava? I turned to see Victoria standing a few feet away, her coat wrapped tightly around her. She looked almost uncertain, not her usual polished self, not the cold, calculating woman who had once told me I was less. Neither of us spoke for a moment, the silence heavy with unspoken words. Then she sighed, glancing away before finally saying, I suppose you've done well for yourself. It was the closest thing to an acknowledgement she had ever given me. I nodded, accepting her words for what they were. I have, I said simply. Another beat of silence, then Charlotte and Lucas, they're struggling. I let out a slow breath, feeling a mix of emotions, pity, resentment, and a strange sense of detachment. Of course, they were struggling. They had built their lives on lies and manipulation, and now they were reaping the consequences. Victoria's voice was careful, neutral. Maybe you could put in a good word. I almost laughed. After everything, she still thought I would be the one to fix things. But this time, I didn't hesitate. Mom, I said, shaking my head. For the first time in my life, their problems aren't mine. Something flickered in her eyes, surprise, maybe. Or maybe she had finally realized that the daughter she had underestimated, the one she had left behind, wasn't the same person anymore. I gave her a small, polite nod. Good night, Mother. Then I turned and walked away one last time, and this time I didn't look back. A week later, I found myself curled up on the couch in our apartment, a glass of wine in hand, watching Patrick frown over a new business proposal. Are you reading or glaring at it? I asked, a smile tugging at my lips. He looked up, a playful glint in his eyes. A bit of both. The next time someone uses the word synergy, I'm charging them extra. I laughed, settling against his side as he pulled me close. For a while, we just sat there, the soft hum of the city outside our window. No tension, no ghosts of the past, just us. Do you regret it? Patrick asked suddenly, his voice soft. I looked at him, my eyebrows furrowed in confusion. Regret what? Not telling them off. Not rubbing your success in their faces. I thought about it for a second before shaking my head. No, I said, my voice steady. That's what they would have done. That's what they would have wanted me to do to prove I still cared about what they thought. But I don't. I turned to look at him, at the life we had built together. I don't need to win against them, Patrick. I just need to keep winning for myself. His gaze softened and he kissed my forehead. Well, then here's to winning. I smiled, clinking my glass against his. To winning. To freedom. To finally letting go.